You may be looking at an image of Mark Edward Achtermann and listening to some resemblance to his voice, reading excerpts from Inspector Leu. Inspector Leu stood up from the indentation in the field and looked at the sky. Snow, or more likely freezing rain, probably starting in the next hour and a half, and the sun would set behind the thickening clouds a half an hour after that. He breathed out a long breath, not quite a sigh. "A grave?" his assistant Barno said, as much as asked. "Could be. There's this, and two others down the slope." He waved his hand vaguely towards the gully where Merv and his constables huddled, blowing on their hands. There the woods were tangled, full of brambles. Hard to say how many years had passed since this side of the hill had been farmed. Leu struck a light and pulled at his pipe. He squatted again by the depression, brushing the brown grass and the hard gray seed heads of knapweed. He muttered, gripping his pipe stem between his teeth. "Look at this, Barno." He pushed back the vegetation to show, shining dully in the failing light, a curved piece of metal. Leu slipped on a glove and pulled up a silver ring. "Well, that's useful." His father and he lived together, alone in the house between the road and the river. He had asked for a dog to be a companion, but his father would not have it. The expense was too great. The boy thought of hunting in the woods, dog at his side. He thought the dog would pay his own way, but the father would not hear of it. He was a practical man. So he told his son, and the boy had no reason to doubt. He had been told often enough that he was not very smart to believe that this was true. He didn't understand much of what people said or why they said it. His mother had been an angel, as mothers are. Now she was still an angel, but in another place. That was what the boy thought. His father had a different view, which he expressed frequently. The father knew, and he had known a lot of women, that women are dirt, and no matter what a man may do, they treat a man like dirt because that's all they know. Sometimes the boy's grandfather came around the bend of the river, driving a team of horses. He stood on the cart they pulled. The boy had seen a picture of kings from long ago who drove horses like that, and he thought his grandfather looked like a long-ago king, although he wasn't. He was a farmer, and he had a chin beard down to his chest that was like a billy goat's beard, and he wore a hat instead of a crown. He would come sometimes around the bend of the river and stop the team at their house, and he would tell the father about God. God would damn the father for drinking. That's what his grandfather would say, mostly. The boy supposed that then, when the father drank, he would be damned, like the river was just above the bend, and all the drink would back up in his throat and overflow through his ears, and he would drown. The boy hated that God was going to do this because he did not want his father to drown. He had seen some men drown old pots, just the way God would do his father, but they didn't see him watching. After they drowned old pots, they left him, sitting in a chair in his duck-hunting blind by the river. The boy waited a long time after the men went away. He thought that old pots would get up and go after them, but he didn't get up for a long time. And the boy went to see if he was asleep. He was not asleep. He was passed into an angel, the way grandmother had been. but his body was still there, with water in his mouth. Mother had known what to do. The father had told the boy what he had told the boy's mother then. Proper burials are a waste of money. Having someone you don't know say some words you don't believe over a body you don't need is a waste of time. If she wanted to bury his mother, she was welcome to use the edge of the far field, and soon. She stinks. And the father would laugh loud about what he had said, but his laugh wasn't a real laugh, and his eyes rolled from side to side. Then he would take a big drink, as though God would damn him. It wasn't the boy's father, but his grandfather who had refused the burial. The boy, however, did not know this. Mother knew, and she knew what to do. She took a spade from the hall, and the boy followed her. Not having a team and cart to use, she put grandmother's body on her shoulder, the way she sometimes carried the boy. Grandmother was wrapped in a sheet, so her arms did not dangle the way the boy's did over his mother's hips when she carried him. Grandmother was just skin and bones, the boy's mother had said. Mother carried the skin and bones of grandmother to the edge of the woods near the river. Near the old apple tree, and with a smooth motion the boy ever after remembered, she slipped grandmother's body to the ground. His mother told him that the apple tree had come from an apple grandmother's grandfather ate, which they planted there long ago. She dug up a bit of the grass and some dried flowers and laid them to one side, and then a bit more, until she had dug about 4 feet one way and 3 the other, measuring the distance with her feet. The boy watched as she dug a pit. He liked to dig, and he was never allowed to dig much at all. He had a little trowel, but he could only dig in the woods by the river, where there were poison ivy and nettles and bramble. He wished he had a garden of his own to plant the things he liked to plant, like grandmother's grandfather must have been able to do. His mother climbed out of the pit and put down the spade. The boy noticed then that she had cut a step in one side of the pit so that it was at 2 levels. She lifted up the skin and bones wrapped in white cloth and clambered into the pit. She set grandmother's body in the deep side of the pit and dug more soil from the shallow side. Then she set down the spade at the edge of the pit. Mother laid the wrapped skin and bones of grandmother flat in the bottom of the pit and then wriggled out on her elbows. The boy pulled the spade away. His mother asked him if he wanted to say anything, but he didn't. His mother didn't either, but she said grandmother had passed to be an angel. She took the spade from him and covered grandmother's body with soil. Now the boy noticed that the soil was gray and full of long, flat rocks. At first, grandmother carefully dropped soft soil on the sheets, but once they were covered, she began to drop larger spadefuls, each with a soft thud and swish in a rhythm, his mother swaying her hips as she dug into the mound of soil and rocks at the side of the pit, and then swung the spade out over the hole, thud and swish, and then the sliding sound of the spade digging into the mound. That was how the boy remembered his mother most. He had been sitting, so she seemed very tall to him. She had a kerchief tied on her head, blowing up to the striped clouds. It was cold then, and he was cold, the wind blowing over his ears. But she was wearing a summer dress and a sweater, and he remembered how her calves moved as she swayed as she filled the pit. Then they had walked back across the lower field, and through the little woods, and over the high field back to the road, and then back to the house between the road and the river. His mother let him carry the spade the whole way. Another missing person report, Barno said. He handed Liu a small file of papers. Not much to go by. Young woman, 22 years old, left her parents' house in Cedar Hills to visit a friend on the 21st of last month. They expected to see her again on the 23rd. When she didn't appear by the 24th, the parents went to the sheriff in Cedar Hills. He spoke with the parents and the friend, walked the route she was supposed to have taken, found nothing. By then it was the 26th. That night, a young woman's body was found in the lake by some fishermen, but that was another case. Sheriff sat on the missing person report while he chased after the death. Yesterday, he had a drowning case against 2 men from Freeport, and then in the afternoon, he sent the missing person report up to us. What the hell? Exclaimed Lou. A 9-day-old trail. All right. Tell me more. He leaned back in his chair to look out the window. He thought he saw the chief inspector hurrying across the train station. Wait, Ven's coming. Ven was an old man now, past his prime in the body but hale in the mind, intolerant of the stupid, slow, and weak when he had been a field officer. He had mellowed somewhat. Some said softened, but not within his hearing. He walked 5 miles every day without fail, regardless of the weather, and swung an iron in the club with such force that young men avoided matches with him. He swung open the door of Lou's office and strode in without a greeting. That's 5, he said, thumping his middle finger on the missing person file that was now sitting in the center of Lou's desk. 5. Where are they? Damn it, Lou. I have Earl Orson breathing fire in my ears. Election coming up. And what can he say? State security for a secure state. What can he do about that? This is Republicans' doing. I can smell the stink of it. If parents are saying, where are our children? And all he can say is, gosh, we don't know. None of us are going to be here come next year. It's upsetting, said Lou. Damn right it's upsetting, Van shouted. You're upset, said Lou. Of course I'm upset. I'd be out there myself if I could get away from Orson. Do you think my Lord Orson was wrong to make you chief inspector? Asked Lou. Perhaps he could still name Gav. Gav! Burns snorted. Then he looked up at Lou, who was smiling faintly. Van brushed his bushy mustache and smiled broadly. Ha! Got me. No, you're right. But you and I both know there are ways I can get out in the field. And I will too, if you don't get something on this right away. I would be delighted to have you with us in the field, but you're too valuable as a shield to keep my Lord Orson off our backs, said Lou. You think the Republicans are behind this? Why? Oh, not really, Verne said, lifting a stack of files from a chair and sitting with the files on his lap. Just something they would wish. Anything to make the royalists look foolish or immoral. They probably nab some girls and hold them in the basement of their headquarters until after Election Day, feeding them cookies and propaganda. And by the time they release them, they'd all vote straight ballot Republican. But they'd make it look like some young lord carried them off to his tower to serve wicked pleasures. Someone like Eastbrook. Time his father finds an honest woman for his wife. Barno chuckled at this behind his back. The chief inspector turned his gaze to the assistant. I hear your father should do the same for you, Verne opined, and brushed his mustaches again distractedly. 5 women missing over as many years. Down in the capital I can see why people go missing there every week and are never found. Those servants of the dead king. Some years back, that was a hell of a case. Followed their trails all up and down the coast. Plenty of sightings, but never a collar. Strange. But here in the country, we can't have this. Murder over in Freeport there, that girl drowned. Sheriff Toll has two clapped up, but of course you saw that. Now, that might be worth inspecting. Toll is not worth the paper the Academy gave him. That's politics for you again, appointment. But you go on around him. He'll squeak, but I'll make sure he doesn't squeak to Orson. I believe that speech is actually supposed to be Vern. So, 5 women missing over as many years. Down in the capital, I can see why people go missing there every day and are never found. Those servants of the dead king some years back, that was a hell of a case. Followed their trails all up and down the coast. Plenty of sightings, but never a collar. Strange. But here in the country, we can't have this. Murder over in Freeport there, that girl drowned. Sheriff Toll has 2 clapped up, but of course you saw that. Now, that might be worth inspecting. Toll is not worth the paper the Academy gave him. That's politics for you again, appointment. But you go on around him. He'll squeak, but I'll make sure he doesn't squeak to Orson. The boy knew that grandmother had died and old Potts had died. He understood death was an ending, but it was also a new beginning. He knew that mice, if not buried after they died, would dry into the most fantastic shapes. His father found them in the cupboards and threw them out of the house, but he collected them and kept them in the workshed behind the house. This was a dusty, jumbled place, gray and brown and dark. Rusty, broken, sharp things were kept there, and molding, strong-smelling cloths rotted there. This was the boy's hiding place when the voices in the house were so loud they echoed in his head. The dried mice he kept on a shelf, low, below the window where only he could crawl. Some of the mice were only bone, but some were partly hairy, especially on their heads and shoulders, but their faces were always pulled back off the bone. The dried mice had very small feet, and their backbones were amazing puzzles to him. He could pull their teeth out of their jaws to look at them, but he always put them back. He would want to be kept together if he were a dead mouse. He was not allowed to have mice in the house. His father made clear that mice are dirty, but the boy found a living mouse, a sweet, bead-eyed, white-bellied mouse under his bed. The mouse was eating when he first saw her, and very slowly he had reached out and touched her back. She had turned her head, looked at him, and gone back to her meal. The boy had been able to lift her up into his hand so long as she had some small piece of food. He put her in his pocket because he knew he was not supposed to have a mouse in the house. He carried her outside and walked to the workshed. Here he found a box, and into the box he put the mouse. He put the box against the wall opposite the window beneath which the dried mice lay in a row. The living mouse explored the corners of the box and tried to reach as high as she could to get out, but the box had high sides. The boy watched her for maybe 10 long breaths, and then he hurried to get her food and water and something to use as a bed. The first mouse was a mouse mother, and in her rag nest she gave birth to 7 pinky mice as the boy watched. Very neatly and purposefully she trimmed each baby from its jelly sack and smoothed each baby's purple skin and blue unseeing eyes. The boy touched each baby as it wriggled in search of milk. He smiled and wished for that moment to be a baby mouse nestled in warmth. He watched until the shed was dark. Then he left the mouse in her box with the saucer of milk and pile of seed and 7 sweet, squirming babies. The mouse mother was a wild thing. and when her babies were weaned, she gnawed her way out of the box and was gone. But the boy kept children of the children of those first babies in a box of wires from which they could not gnaw. They ate the seeds he gave them, and shredded the cloth he gave them, and drank the water he gave them, and they became a great family of mice. And they died, and he buried them. He buried them in small pits, remembering the way his mother had buried grandmother. There were many pits, one beside another in the soft, musty soil between the drip line of the eaves and the wall of the shed. The boy sometimes thought about digging them up just to see whether they looked like the dried mice, but he never did. Once he dug into a grave by mistake. He was sure it was the grave of the last mouse to have died, but there was nothing in the grave but soil. Liu wiped the last dish dry and set it in the cupboard. The house was dark, except for the fading light at the window and the lamp in the hall. He picked up his glass and walked out onto the porch. No wind was blowing, and the full moon was just rising. He sat in the porch and nursed his wine. The neighbor's dog bayed at the moon. From 5 houses on nights like this, young women had set out never to return or to send any word. The first was 9 years ago, then 5, then 2, and 2 this year. The women had little in common. They were from different neighborhoods, different classes of society. 3 were brunette, 2 were blonde. The first was 18 years old when she disappeared, so she would be 27 now. The second was 20, she would be 24, almost 25. The third was 17, and so was the fourth. The fifth was 22, different weights, heights, eye color, education. "You're obsessing," Liu heard his wife saying in his memory, his ex-wife. He looked at the bland white face of the moon just clearing the thick branches of a maple at the edge of his garden, so bright in its rising it was almost like looking at the sun. He could not empty himself the way the old poets and sages could do. He could not quiet the racing mind. So he focused instead on directing the race. But now he felt tired. 3 long days had passed since Verne's commission, 3 long days of travel and questions without any answers that he could fit into the puzzle. These 5 cases could all be 1, or 4, or 3, or 2. He ran through all the permutations, jotting down the possibilities on an index card, all individual cases, A and B together in the other's individual cases, A and C together in the other's individual cases, and so on. He found the repetition soothing. It was like proofs of categorical syllogisms or geometry or the change book. Regular, consistent, orderly, the complex broken into simpler and simpler units until the atomic form is revealed, that which cannot be broken. That would be the end of each case, the discovery of the atomic form. He felt in his heart, in his gut, that these 3 cases went together and that maybe others that seemed to be separate were not. The sequence, at any rate, had the look of a series, diminishing periods between incidents. But that was one pattern, and as patterns converge, they change each other. And then what looked like one thing looks like another. One must be aware of change and the possibility of change. The dog had stopped barking, and Liu had finished his glass. The moon was hidden from view behind the eaves, but the moonlight was bright on the garden. Liu went inside, washed and dried the glass, and set it in its place, folded the towel across its rack, extinguished the lamp in the hall, and went to bed in the dark, setting his clothes in a neat, shadowy pile beside the mattress. Betty did not like confined spaces. She did not like being restrained. Her sisters slept tightly rolled in their quilts, but Betty stretched out her arms wide and threw off the covers. Then she would be cold, and she would wake and sit in the moonlight looking at her sisters like piles of soft stuff or like snowy hills seen from a distance. Betty did not want to be afraid of anything. She was the oldest daughter, the oldest child in a family of 7 children. Her mother was able and, as she said, was fully certified to be a mother. Still, Betty wanted to help her mother and to be like her mother, and when she woke at night because of her fears, she looked at her sisters and promised herself that she would become strong. Betty's father and mother had been in the academy. What that meant to Betty was that in a few years she would either go to the academy or at least to university. She and all her sisters and brothers, although maybe not Ed or Mary. They seemed more destined for prosperous but uncelebrated lives as turf diggers. To be able to excel, one must be able to control. For an excellent self, one must have self-control. Betty thought sometimes that Ed and Mary had no self-control at all, but she loved them. Betty's friends were all much the same as Betty, oldest or older daughters of large families, except Tinker Ford. Tinker was an only child, and she acted as though she were the king herself. How exactly she and Tinker had met, Betty could never remember. They had known each other as long as she knew anyone. Tinker was with Betty on the day her sister Raven was born, so that went back at least 14 of Betty's 18 years. "You need to go up to the crack," Tinker Ford ordered when Betty told her friends that she had dreamed of being crushed. "That wasn't really my first thought," said Betty. "What is this, a dare?" "Sure," said Tinker, "a dare. I dare you to come with me right now up to the crack." "Leave her alone, Tinker Ford," their friend Kay said. She disliked comfort. She disliked conflict and always tried to keep Tinker from becoming excited. "Leave her alone, Tinker Ford," Tinker Ford mocked. "I know my name. Anyway, she's got to get over her fears of small places if you're going to go into academy." "You just changed from third person to second person," Adele remarked. "I suppose that means that you won't be with us when we go to academy." "Yeah," Tinker said, making a rude gesture. Adele looked shocked and looked away. "So, I guess you're not going to come either." "How is going to the crack going to help? Are you going to do some sort of magic ritual or something?" Mary, the last to speak, was Betty's cousin and the namesake of Betty's younger sister. Once Betty had embarrassed herself by asking, since Mary was her cousin and the other Mary was her sister, what was her cousin Mary to her sister Mary? The cousin Mary was fond of all sorts of puzzles and tricks and anything having to do with symbols and rituals. It was she who led the girls in interpreting tossed coins or patterns and threads or numbers. "Or something. But you can come along," said Tinker. "I dare you all to come along." "But why, Tinker Ford?" asked Adele. Tinker gave an exasperated sigh. "To get over claustrophobia, of course." The crack is what young people in Cedar Hill Township call a jumbled outcropping of brown rock overlooking the river at Cedar Hill itself. The young people from Cedar Hall, on the other side of Cedar Hill, call it Cold Cave. It opens like a crack in the direction of the town of Cedar Hill, and a well-beaten track runs down the hill for about 2 miles, then doubles back on itself for another 2 miles to Cedar Hill. If one wished, one could climb down the rocky slope directly from the cave entrance to the town in the distance of maybe a half a mile, and now and then a drunken group attempted it, but it is really much easier to take the longer hike. Betty and her friends, persuaded finally by Tinker, made the climb the long way. All had been there before, but Adele, who tried very hard to be delicate. Tinker had been in the cave many times and knew all the main twists and turns so well, she managed to get out of the cave once without a candle when hers had gone out, and she had no matches left to relight it. She was very proud of that, although she also knew that she had been terrified at the time, and also that she had not really been very far from the entrance and was in familiar passages. The boy liked the idea of dogs. He thought this meant he liked dogs. Some of his neighbors had dogs, and he saw them as their masters walked them, or as they ran loose, or sitting on the edges of chains by their kennels. The boy wanted a dog, but his father would not allow it, because he said that dogs were too expensive to keep. The boy was growing older now, and he asked his father whether, if he worked for money, he could have a dog. His father agreed that if he worked for money, the father would hold it for him until he had enough to keep a dog. And so the boy began on his working day. He worked first for a neighbor who needed help bringing in the hay the afternoon of the day the boy's father first said the boy could have a dog. That work only lasted that afternoon, but it was his first money for a job, and the boy was excited. He took the money to his father, who put it in an empty jar next to his seat. The boy asked his father how much more money he would need, and the father said he would need a bit more. The next day, the boy woke early and went to the neighbor's farm to ask if they had any work for him to do for money. They did not, but they said that Dr. Easton, down the creek from them, had some brush he wanted to have cut, so the boy walked down the creek to the doctor's house. The doctor told the boy that he liked boys who were strong and brave, and that by coming to his door, the doctor was sure that the boy was brave, but the doctor would wait until he saw his work to know whether he was strong. The boy wanted to be very strong, so he did everything the doctor told him to do and cleared a lot of brush all morning long. At midday, the doctor's wife gave the boy and the doctor a big meal of pickles and cheese and bread and sausage and beer for the doctor and milk for the boy. Then the boy worked until the sun was about to go down, and the doctor gave him a lot of money and a firm handshake and said that if he would come tomorrow, there would be more work for a brave and strong boy. The boy worked for the doctor all through the spring, and just before summer came, the doctor said to the boy, as they sat eating their midday meal, how he wondered what all the money he gave to the boy was for. The doctor wondered whether the boy was saving money to go to university, but the boy told him that it was to be able to pay for a dog. And the doctor asked the boy where he kept the money, and the boy told him, and it seemed to the boy that the doctor was a little angry, but he didn't say anything, except that maybe he should go and see a neighbor. And so the boy thought nothing of it and went back to work, and at the end of the day, the doctor paid him twice what he usually paid him, and the doctor said that he should give half to his father and keep half to himself. But the boy did not know what half the money was, so the doctor showed him, and the boy put half the money in his handkerchief in his right pocket and the other half in his left pocket, where he usually carried the money he earned. All right, Mr. Wheeler, tell us about the last time you saw your daughter. Lou settled into the cushioned seat Wheeler had offered him. Barno and the sergeant sat nearby on wooden chairs, notebooks poised. Well, it's pretty much what I said to them 4 years ago, Wheeler said, taking a seat opposite Lou with the kitchen table between them. Pretty much? Lou asked. Well, some things I may not remember the same. Just tell me the way you feel comfortable telling me now. Can I see what I said before? Wheeler asked. I don't have a record of your earlier statement with me, Mr. Wheeler, Lou said. Your current memory of your daughter will serve our purpose now, so please tell me what you remember now about the last time you saw your daughter. Well, said Wheeler, looking from Lou to Barno to the sergeant. Tat, that's what we called our daughter. She always done marketing for us. She took what we had and she brought back what she bought with it. So we had this hand cart, a wheelbarrow, and we'd load that up with a crate of chickens and like a box of carrots and sand and whatever else. I'm not going to bore you with all of what we might send. We have a garden and an orchard, as well animals and fields, and we trim out the woods too, so we have all kinds to market. He looked at Lou, who nodded and gestured with his hand as if to say, go on. And now, your daughter? The three men filed out of Wheeler's farmyard and stood for a moment, looking down the hill toward the town. Not much to go by, eh? Said Barno. No. Compare his statement today with that of 4 years ago and make a list of any substantial differences, said Lou. We have the basic description, the clothing list, had on and took with her. I'm surprised no one found the hand cart, but maybe she took it with her wherever she went. What about the boyfriend? The sergeant said. Yes, Master Jack Woods. Name sounds a bit suspect, wouldn't you say? We'll pay a visit on his mother, the widow Woods, I think. Mistress Woods, Barno said when the old woman came to the door. I am Assistant Inspector Barno of the Regional Police. This is my supervisor, Inspector Liu. We would like to ask you some questions about your son, Jack Woods. Oh, what? Said the old woman. What has he done now? The men exchanged a quick look. We're not here to accuse him of anything, madam, just to find out about his relationship with Tat Wheeler. I don't know anything about Tat Wheeler. The boy was carrying meat pies and bread for the bakery in town when he met Tinker Ford. He was watching the blue wasps form mud nests. She stopped to watch him. She asked him what he was looking at, and he told her, and they watched together as the wasps appeared and built nests on the side of the fair booth. They stood in the shade of the booth, close together. It was a hot day. Tinker Ford wore a short dress of soft linen and many necklaces and bracelets with rings on her fingers and even on her toes and in her ears and in her hair. The boy had never seen anyone wear so many rings.